Some secrets are carried for years, hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. What happened on Family Feud in February 2024 would reveal a truth so unexpected that it left Steve Harvey speechless and an entire studio audience in tears. This is a story about love that endures through impossible circumstances, about sacrifice that goes unrecognized for decades, and about the moment when hidden truth finally comes to light. After 20 years of marriage, one woman's revelation would remind us all that we never truly know what burdens others are carrying or what quiet heroism exists in the people we think we know. If you believe in the power of truth and the strength it takes to carry burdens alone, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share stories that reveal the hidden courage in everyday people and remind us that everyone has a story worth hearing. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful moments to viewers everywhere. The Morrison family from Portland, Oregon stood on the Family Feud stage with an energy that suggested genuine closeness and affection. Daniel and Sarah Morrison had been married for exactly 20 years, a milestone they had celebrated just 2 months before their television appearance. They had 3 teenage children competing alongside them, and to everyone watching, they appeared to be a happy, stable family unit that had successfully navigated 2 decades of marriage together. Daniel Morrison was 43 years old and worked as a high school history teacher. He was the kind of teacher that students remembered fondly years after graduation, someone who made the subject come alive with stories and enthusiasm. He coached the debate team and was known for staying late to help struggling students. His colleagues described him as dedicated, patient, and genuinely caring. He seemed to embody everything a good teacher should be. Sarah Morrison was 41 years old and worked from home as a freelance graphic designer. She had built a successful career that allowed her flexibility to be present for their children while also contributing financially to the household. Her clients appreciated her creativity and reliability. She was known in their neighborhood as someone who organized community events, volunteered at the school, and always had time to help a neighbor in need. Their marriage appeared, by all external measures, to be successful and happy. They held hands in public, laughed at each other's jokes, and spoke about each other with obvious affection. Their children seemed well-adjusted and happy. Friends considered them relationship goals, the couple that proved lasting love was possible. But beneath this picture of marital success lay a reality that only Sarah fully understood. 20 years earlier, when Sarah and Daniel had gotten married, they had been young and deeply in love. Daniel had just finished his teaching credential, and Sarah was starting her career in graphic design. They had dreams of building a life together, of raising a family, of growing old side by side. The wedding had been beautiful, surrounded by friends and family who celebrated their union and wished them well. But 3 years into their marriage, something happened that would change everything. Daniel began experiencing symptoms that he initially dismissed as stress or fatigue. He was forgetting things, struggling with coordination, having difficulty with tasks that had always been easy for him. When the symptoms persisted and worsened, he finally went to see a doctor. The diagnosis was devastating. Daniel had early-onset multiple sclerosis, a progressive neurological disease that would gradually rob him of physical and cognitive function. The doctors explained that the disease was unpredictable, that some people progressed slowly while others deteriorated rapidly, that there was no cure and limited treatment options. Daniel was 26 years old, and he was being told that his body would eventually betray him in ways he could not control or prevent. The news had been crushing for both of them. They had cried together, held each other, and tried to process what this meant for their future. But after the initial shock wore off, they had to make decisions about how to move forward. Daniel had been adamant about one thing. He did not want to be defined by his disease. He did not want petty or special treatment. He did not want people to see him as sick or limited. So they had made a decision that would shape the next 17 years of their lives. They decided to tell almost no one about the diagnosis. Daniel's parents knew. Sarah's sister knew. A very small circle of people who needed to know for medical or practical reasons. But beyond that, they kept the secret. Daniel continued teaching, determined to work as long as he was able, Sarah supported this decision, understanding his need for normalcy and dignity. The disease had progressed slowly, mercifully slowly, but it had progressed nonetheless. Daniel experienced periods of relapse and remission. Some years were better than others. But gradually, imperceptibly to those who did not know what to look for, he was losing ground. The tremors in his hands that he explained away as too much caffeine. The occasional stumbles that he blamed on clumsiness. The fatigue that he attributed to the demands of teaching. All of it was the disease, quietly advancing. Sarah had carried the weight of this secret for 17 years. She managed Daniel's medications, scheduled his doctor appointments under the guise of routine checkups, researched treatments and therapies, and watched for signs of progression. She had adapted their home in subtle ways to make things easier for him, changes that looked like design choices, but were actually accessibility modifications. She had taken on more of the physical household tasks as Daniel's strength and coordination declined, making it seem natural rather than necessary. But the burden of the secret went beyond practical management. Sarah lived with constant worry about Daniel's health and future. She carried the fear of what would happen when he could no longer hide the disease, when it progressed beyond what could be explained away. She bore the loneliness of not being able to talk openly about what she was experiencing, of not being able to ask for support or share her fears with friends who thought her life was simple and blessed. Their children knew their father had a health condition that required medication and monitoring, but they did not know the full extent of the diagnosis or prognosis. Sarah and Daniel had agreed to tell them when they were older, when they could better understand and handle the information. But that conversation kept getting postponed, the right time never quite arriving. Recently, Sarah had been feeling the weight of the secret more heavily. They were approaching 20 years of marriage, and 17 of those years had been shaped by this hidden reality. She had begun to question whether they had made the right decision in keeping it private. She wondered if the isolation and pretense were worth the protection of Daniel's dignity. She felt exhausted from carrying this burden largely alone. The Family Feud appearance had been planned as a celebration of their 20th anniversary. Their children had suggested it as a fun family activity, and Daniel had been enthusiastic about the idea. Sarah had agreed, though part of her had felt the irony of going on a show about families when her own family was built on a significant secret. But she had learned to live with contradictions, to show one face to the world, while carrying different truths privately. What Sarah did not anticipate was that this public stage would become the place where the secret would finally emerge, where 17 years of silence would break. The Family Feud taping began with the usual excitement and energy. The Morrison family was competing against another family from Oregon, and both teams were showing good spirits and competitive energy. Steve Harvey conducted the opening interviews with his characteristic charm, asking about how long people had been married, what they did for work, and what brought them to the show. When Steve spoke with Sarah and Daniel, he congratulated them on their 20 years of marriage. He made a joke about how rare it was to see couples who had been together that long still seeming to genuinely like each other. Sarah and Daniel laughed, and Daniel put his arm around Sarah in a gesture that was clearly affectionate and genuine. They answered Steve's questions easily, comfortable with each other and with being in the public eye. The game progressed through several rounds with both families showing strong performance. The Morrison family was doing particularly well, answering questions with good instincts and teamwork. Daniel was animated and engaged, clearly enjoying the experience. Sarah participated enthusiastically, though those who knew her well might have noticed a slight tension in her expression, a watchfulness that suggested something beneath the surface. Then came the question that would change everything. It was one of those Family Feud prompts designed to be heartwarming and relatable, asking about the challenges and triumphs of long marriages. Steve read the question with his usual dramatic flair, expecting answers about communication, compromise, and keeping romance alive. Name something that makes a marriage stronger over time. It was Sarah's turn at the buzzer. She buzzed in and gave an answer that seemed perfectly appropriate for the question. Facing challenges together. It was the number one answer. The board revealed it with the satisfying ding, and the audience applauded. Steve nodded approvingly. It was a good answer, the kind that resonated because it was true. But then Steve, in his role as host, did what he often did. He engaged with the answer, asking a follow-up question to add some color and personal connection to the game. Sarah, you said facing challenges together. You and Daniel have been married 20 years. What has been the biggest challenge you have faced together that made your marriage stronger? It was meant to be a simple question, an opportunity for a touching or funny story that would add warmth to the show. Steve expected perhaps a story about financial struggles when they were young, or navigating parenting challenges, or dealing with difficult in-laws. He had no way of knowing that he had just asked the question that would unlock 17 years of secrets. Sarah stood there, microphone in hand, and felt something shift inside her. She had been carrying this secret for so long, protecting Daniel's privacy and dignity, maintaining the illusion that their life was simple and uncomplicated. But in that moment, standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people and cameras that would broadcast to millions more, something in her broke open. Maybe it was the exhaustion of 17 years of secrecy. Maybe it was the irony of being asked about marriage strength while hiding the very thing that had tested and proven that strength. Maybe it was simply that she was tired of pretending. Whatever the reason, Sarah made a decision in that split second that would change everything. She looked at Daniel, who stood a few feet away. Their eyes met, and in that look was a question and a request for permission. Daniel, who had spent 17 years protecting his secret, saw something in his wife's expression that made him understand what was about to happen. And in that moment, he made his own decision. He nodded, just slightly, giving her permission to speak the truth they had been hiding. Sarah turned back to Steve and began to speak. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion that was impossible to miss. Mr. Harvey, 3 years after we got married, Daniel was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. He was 26 years old, and we were told he had a progressive neurological disease that would gradually take away his physical abilities. We decided together not to tell most people. Daniel did not want to be seen as sick or limited. He wanted to keep teaching, to keep living his life as normally as possible for as long as he could. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey's expression changed from his usual playful engagement to something much more serious. He looked at Sarah, then at Daniel, trying to process what he had just heard. Sarah continued, and now tears were streaming down her face. For 17 years, I have watched my husband fight this disease every single day. I have watched him push through fatigue that would have stopped most people. I have seen him adapt and compensate as his body slowly fails him. I have managed medications and doctor appointments and treatments, all while pretending to the world that everything is fine. She paused, her voice breaking. And the hardest part has not been the disease itself, it has been carrying this secret. It has been not being able to talk about what we are going through. It has been watching Daniel sacrifice so much to maintain his independence and dignity, and not being able to tell anyone how brave he is, how hard he fights every single day just to do what other people take for granted. Daniel had moved to stand beside Sarah. He put his arm around her, and there were tears in his eyes as well. Steve Harvey stood silent, clearly moved by what he was hearing and understanding the weight of what had just been revealed. Sarah was not finished. You asked what challenge made our marriage stronger. This is it. Facing this disease together while keeping it private has been the hardest thing we have ever done. But it has also shown me what real partnership looks like. It has shown me what commitment means when things get difficult. It has taught me that love is not just about the good times. Love is about staying when things get hard, about carrying burdens together, about protecting each other's dignity even when it costs you something. The audience had gone from silence to quiet crying. Many people were visibly emotional, moved by the raw honesty and pain in Sarah's words. Steve Harvey himself had tears in his eyes, a rare moment of being genuinely at a loss for words. Steve Harvey stood silent for a long moment, clearly processing what he had just heard and trying to find appropriate words for a moment that transcended typical game show interaction. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion and respect. Sarah, Daniel, I need to say something to both of you. In all my years of doing this show, I have heard a lot of stories. I have met thousands of families, but what you just shared, that is one of the most powerful testimonies about marriage and commitment I have ever heard. He turned to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we just witnessed something extraordinary. We talk a lot about what makes marriages work, about communication and compromise and keeping romance alive, but what we just heard is about something deeper. This is about the kind of love that shows up every day, even when it is hard. This is about sacrifice that goes unseen and burdens carried privately. This is about real commitment. Steve turned back to Daniel. Sir, I want to say something to you. You have spent 17 years fighting to maintain your independence and dignity. You have worked as a teacher, impacting young lives, while dealing with a disease that most people cannot even imagine. That takes courage that I cannot even comprehend. Daniel spoke for the first time since the revelation, his voice steady but emotional. Thank you, Steve. But the real courage has been Sarah's. I get to be the hero fighting the disease. She has had to be the invisible support, the one carrying so much of the weight without any recognition. I do not think I understood until right now how much she has sacrificed to protect my dignity and my ability to keep living normally. Steve nodded. That brings me to what I want to say to you, Sarah. What you have done for your husband, what you have carried for 17 years, that is love in its purest and most selfless form. You have been a partner in the truest sense of the word. You have protected his dignity, supported his choices, and carried burdens that most people will never know about. That is extraordinary. The Morrison children, who had been standing at the family podium throughout this exchange, were all crying. Their oldest daughter spoke up, her voice shaky with emotion. We knew Dad had a health condition, but we did not know the full story. We did not understand how serious it was or how long Mom and Dad have been dealing with this. Hearing it now, understanding what they have been carrying, I am just so proud of both of them. Steve looked at the children with compassion. I imagine this is a lot to process for you all. Your parents made choices about privacy that affected the whole family. But I want you to hear me on this. The reason they made those choices was to protect your childhood, to let you grow up without the weight of worry that would have come with knowing your father's prognosis. That was a gift they gave you, even if you did not know it. He turned back to Sarah and Daniel. I need to ask you something. Why did you decide to share this now? What made you choose this moment to speak this truth after 17 years of keeping it private? Sarah took a breath before answering. I honestly did not plan to say anything. When you asked the question, I was going to give a safe answer and move on. But something in me just broke open. I realized I was tired of pretending. I realized that hiding this truth was protecting Daniel's privacy, but it was also making invisible the very thing that has defined our marriage and tested our strength. She looked at her husband. Daniel has been so brave for 17 years. He has fought every day to maintain his independence and dignity, and I wanted the world to know that. I wanted people to see him not as someone to pity, but as someone to admire, because what he has accomplished while fighting this disease is remarkable. Daniel added his own perspective. When Sarah looked at me before she spoke, I understood what she was asking. And I realized that maybe it is time to stop hiding. Maybe there is strength in honesty, not just in fighting privately. Maybe our story could help other people who are dealing with difficult diagnoses feel less alone. Steve nodded slowly. I want to say something that I think is important. The choice you made 17 years ago to keep this private was valid. You were protecting Daniel's autonomy and dignity. But the choice you are making now to share your truth is also valid. Both choices come from love and a desire to do what is right for your family. He addressed the audience again. What we are witnessing here is a family that has faced impossible challenges with grace and strength. They made difficult choices about privacy and honesty. They carried burdens that would have broken many people. And they did it all while raising children and working and maintaining a marriage that is clearly built on genuine love and respect. Steve made a decision about how to proceed. He announced that they would take a break to give the Morrison family some private time to process what had just happened. The game would continue, but first they needed space to regroup as a family. The audience was asked to give them privacy, and production paused. In a private room away from cameras and audience, the Morrison family had the conversation they had been postponing for years. Daniel and Sarah explained to their children the full scope of the diagnosis, the progression of the disease, and what the future might hold. The children asked questions, expressed their feelings, and ultimately embraced their parents with love and support. When they returned to the stage, there was a different energy about the family. The secret that had separated them was now shared knowledge. The burden that Sarah and Daniel had carried alone was now distributed among people who loved them and wanted to help. There was grief in that room, but there was also relief and a sense of truth finally being spoken. The game resumed, and the Morrison family played with a kind of freedom they had not had before. They won their match and advanced to fast money. Sarah and Daniel played together, answering the questions as a team. They won the $20,000, but the money seemed almost incidental compared to what had happened on that stage. Before the taping concluded, Steve called the Morrison family together for one final moment. He looked at each of them and then spoke directly to the camera, addressing the viewing audience that would eventually watch this episode. What you have witnessed today is not about a game or a prize. This is about a family that has shown us what real love looks like. This is about courage that shows up every single day, about burdens carried with grace, about promises kept even when they are hard. This family has reminded us all that we never know what challenges other people are facing or what quiet heroism exists in the lives around us. When the Family Feud episode featuring the Morrison family aired 8 weeks later, it became one of the most watched and discussed episodes in the show's history. The clip of Sarah's revelation was shared millions of times across social media platforms. News outlets picked up the story. The moment resonated with viewers in profound ways, touching on themes of love, sacrifice, illness, dignity, and the hidden burdens that people carry. The response was overwhelmingly supportive and emotional. Thousands of people reached out to share their own stories of dealing with chronic illness, either as patients or as caregivers. Many expressed gratitude for seeing their own hidden struggles represented and validated. The hashtag Invisible Burdens began trending, with people sharing the challenges they faced that others could not see or know about. Multiple sclerosis advocacy organizations contacted the Morrison family, asking if they would be willing to share their story more broadly to raise awareness about the disease and the challenges faced by patients and families. Sarah and Daniel agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to give meaning to the 17 years of private struggle they had endured. In the months following the episode airing, the Morrison family experienced significant changes. The most immediate impact was the relief of no longer maintaining the secret. Friends and colleagues who had watched the show reached out with support and understanding. Daniel's principal and fellow teachers expressed admiration for his dedication and offered accommodations that would help him continue teaching for as long as possible. Their children processed the information with the support of counseling and open family discussions. The oldest daughter later wrote an essay about the experience that was published in a major magazine. In it, she reflected on learning that her parents had been protecting her from worry, while also recognizing that knowing the truth, even when painful, allowed for deeper connection and authentic support. 6 months after the episode aired, Sarah and Daniel were invited to speak at a national conference on chronic illness and caregiving. Their presentation focused on the complex decisions families face about privacy, disclosure, and dignity when dealing with progressive diseases. They spoke honestly about both the benefits and costs of their decision to keep the diagnosis largely private for 17 years. Sarah addressed the particular challenges faced by caregivers who must balance supporting their partners while also protecting their autonomy and dignity. She spoke about the loneliness of carrying knowledge and worry alone, about the exhaustion of maintaining appearances while managing complex medical needs, about the grief of watching someone you love slowly decline while pretending to the world that everything is fine. But she also spoke about love in its most practical form. Love as showing up every day. Love as managing medications and scheduling appointments. Love is adapting and accommodating without making your partner feel diminished. Love is carrying burdens so that the person you love can continue to live with dignity and purpose. Daniel spoke about the perspective of someone living with progressive illness. He discussed the desire to maintain independence and normalcy for as long as possible. He talked about the fear of being defined by disease, of being pitied or treated as less capable. He acknowledged that his desire for privacy had placed a significant burden on Sarah and expressed gratitude for her willingness to carry that burden out of love and respect for his choices. He also addressed something important that many people with invisible illnesses face: the judgment and skepticism that comes when people cannot see your disability. He explained that there had been times over the years when colleagues had made comments about him seeming tired or unfocused, not knowing that he was fighting through symptoms they could not see. He talked about the extra effort required to appear normal when your body is actively failing. 1 year after the Family Feud appearance, the Morrison family was interviewed for a documentary about couples facing chronic illness together. The documentary explored how serious health diagnoses impact marriages and families, featuring multiple couples at different stages of their journeys. The Morrison family's segment focused on their decision to go public after years of privacy and how that decision had affected their family dynamics. In the documentary, their children spoke about learning to balance worry for their father with respect for his desire to live as normally as possible. They discussed how the public revelation had actually brought them closer as a family, creating space for honest conversations about fears and hopes for the future. They expressed admiration for both parents and gratitude for the childhood they had been given, even if it had been built partly on protective secrets. The documentary also featured interviews with medical professionals and therapists who work with families facing progressive illnesses. They discussed the complex ethical and emotional considerations around disclosure and privacy, acknowledging that there are no easy answers and that different families will make different choices based on their values and circumstances. Steve Harvey continued to reference the Morrison family in interviews and speaking engagements. He talked about how that moment on Family Feud had affected him personally, reminding him that every person he meets is carrying burdens he knows nothing about. He emphasized the importance of approaching others with compassion and the recognition that surface appearances rarely tell the full story of someone's life. 2 years after the original episode, Daniel's disease had progressed to the point where he could no longer teach full-time. He retired from his position at the high school, though he continued to work part-time as a tutor and mentor for the debate team. The transition was difficult emotionally, representing a loss of identity and independence. But having already shared his diagnosis publicly, he was able to retire with honesty about his reasons rather than making up alternative explanations. His colleagues and students organized a retirement celebration that acknowledged both his teaching excellence and his courage in facing his illness while continuing to impact young lives. Former students sent testimonials about how Daniel had influenced them, many commenting that his dedication, despite his health challenges, had taught them about perseverance and commitment. Sarah and Daniel wrote a book together titled 20 Years of Truth, Love, Illness, and the Burdens We Carry. The book explored their journey from diagnosis through public revelation, discussing the decisions they made and the lessons they learned. It became a resource for other couples and families facing similar challenges, offering both practical advice and emotional validation. In the book's final chapter, Sarah reflected on that moment on the Family Feud stage, when she made the split-second decision to reveal their secret. She wrote that she had not planned it, had not thought through the consequences, but that it had been the right decision for their family at that moment in time. The relief of no longer carrying the secret alone had been immense. The support they received had been overwhelming. The ability to be honest about their reality had freed them in ways she had not anticipated. Daniel added his own reflection in that chapter. He acknowledged that his desire for privacy and normalcy had come at a cost to Sarah and their family. While he still believed it had been important to maintain his independence and dignity for as long as possible, he recognized that the burden of secrecy had been heavy. He expressed gratitude to Sarah for carrying that burden with love and grace, and to their children for understanding the complexity of the choices they had made. 5 years after their Family Feud appearance, the Morrison family returned to the show for a special episode featuring families with memorable moments. The physical changes in Daniel were evident. He now used a cane regularly and his movements were more limited, but his spirit and mind remained sharp, and his love for Sarah and their children was as apparent as ever. Steve Harvey welcomed them back with obvious affection and respect. He asked them to reflect on the 5 years since that moment when Sarah had shared their secret. Sarah spoke about the relief of living in truth rather than secrecy, about the support they had received from their community, about the meaning they had found in using their story to help others. Daniel spoke about facing the progression of his disease with honesty rather than denial, about the dignity that comes from accepting help rather than refusing it out of pride, about the gift of time with his family lived authentically rather than behind a facade of normalcy. Their children, now young adults, spoke about watching their parents face enormous challenges with grace and partnership. They talked about the lessons they had learned about commitment, about showing up for people you love even when things are hard, about the difference between the fairy tale version of marriage and the real work of building a life together through good times and difficult ones. The legacy of the Morrison family's moment on Family Feud extended far beyond their individual story. It sparked conversations in medical communities about how to better support families dealing with chronic progressive illnesses. It prompted discussions about the balance between patient autonomy and family communication. It raised awareness about invisible disabilities and the judgment people face when their struggles are not visible to others. Support groups for multiple sclerosis patients and caregivers reported increased attendance and engagement in the months following the episode airing. Many people said that seeing the Morrison family's story had given them permission to be more open about their own struggles, to ask for help rather than suffering in isolation, to acknowledge the reality of their situations rather than maintaining exhausting facades. The story also resonated beyond the specific context of chronic illness. It spoke to anyone who had ever carried a secret burden, who had supported a loved one through difficult circumstances while maintaining appearances of normalcy, who had made sacrifices that went unrecognized and unacknowledged. The universality of the themes, love, sacrifice, burden, truth, dignity, allowed the story to touch people across different circumstances and experiences. If this story moved you, if it reminds you that everyone carries burdens we cannot see, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share stories that reveal the hidden courage in everyday people and remind us to approach others with compassion and understanding. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful and meaningful stories to viewers everywhere. Remember the Morrison family's lesson: we never truly know what challenges others are facing or what quiet heroism exists in the people around us. Approach everyone with compassion. Recognize that surface appearances rarely tell the full story. And if you are carrying a burden alone, know that there is strength in sharing your truth and allowing others to support you. Sometimes the heaviest burdens become lighter when we stop carrying them in secret